Perfect. Well, it is right at 7 o'clock, so we're going to get going. I have to click, got it. I'm Dr. Betsy Wickstrom, and I'm a board member for the 802 United. We're a nonprofit organization for all of Kansas, and the point of our organization is to educate Kansans on topics that affect all of us. And we're always trying to magnify as many voices as we can of people that want to have a genuine dialogue, not necessarily people who just want to sling arrows at us. But if anyone really wants to have a dialogue about the issues that matter to us all as Kansans, we're all ears. And our Facebook page, The 802 United, and our website, www.802united.org, are available for ongoing education. Right now, we have a curriculum that I wrote, which is about healthcare access in Kansas. And one part of that is about expanding care, which we talked about last month, and probably is going to come up again tonight. And one part of that is also about marginalized communities and everyone being able to access healthcare. Rural Kansas, people that fit a certain demographic, my personal belief, healthcare is a human right. And so you're going to see a lot of that if you come and visit with us at 802 United. But we're also about voting rights, and we're about civil rights, and we're about human rights. We're about common sense gun ownership. We're going to just leave that right there and not say anything inflammatory, because it's not. People who are gun owners need to be responsible, like drivers need to be responsible. So that's the sort of thing that you get when you interact with the 802 United. But tonight, we are so delighted to have Kansas Reflector with us. And so what I'm going to do to start us off is just read you our vision statement and our mission statement. And then Julie Wilson, our board president, is going to take it away. So the 802 United values the people and opportunities available in Kansas. We strive to make our state a welcoming environment for all humans, utilizing principles that put community and purposeful kindness ahead of ideological extremism. We're a Kansas-based nonprofit organization. We are nonpartisan. We're dedicated to education and awareness of Kansas regarding issues that affect us all. And we use the 3 V's method to make the change we want to see in the world: voices, volunteering, and voting. Take it away, Julie.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. We've not ever had this many people with us on live, so this is extremely exciting. Tonight we have the Kansas Reflector with us, and it is a nonprofit online news organization that covers state government and politics. And it's part of a nationwide group known as the State Newsroom. And if you guys have followed politics in Kansas for a while, you will recognize our guest, Sherman Smith. He's the editor-in-chief of the Kansas Reflector, and he writes about things that powerful people don't want you to know. He's a 2-time Kansas Press Association Journalist of the Year. His award-winning reporting includes stories about education, technology, foster care, voting, COVID-19, sex abuse, and access to the reproductive health care. Before founding the Kansas Reflector in 2020, he spent 16 years at the Topeka Capital Journal, and he graduated from Emporia State in 2004, back when the school still valued English and journalism. That makes me giggle, because I too am an Emporia State graduate, back when they valued sending out good teachers. He was raised in the country at the end of a dead-end road in Lyon County. So Sherman, welcome. How are you tonight?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Betsy and Julie, for making this happen, inviting me on. I always welcome the opportunity to talk about Kansas Reflector and journalism and what we do. I think too many people today have never actually encountered a journalist or spoken with a journalist very much. And so we try to get our message out as often as we can. I launched Kansas Reflector, as Julie said, in 2020. It's been a great 3.5 years. It's my dream job, and we just feel so fortunate to be able to do this as a nonprofit. We have total editorial control. We do get the bulk of our support from State's Newsroom, which is working to try to put journalists back into state houses where the ranks have been depleted all across the country. We're up to about 40 affiliates now across, and more about to come online. There's some partnerships with existing nonprofits in other states. So I think we will have an imprint in every state before the election next year.
So that will be awesome.
Yeah, everything that we publish, we allow people to read for free. We don't do advertising. There's no paywall. We do welcome tax-deductible donations to support our work. We also allow other media as part of our public service mission. Other media can publish everything that we have for free as well. And so our stories appear in about 30 newspapers across the state on a weekly basis, many of them very small, but it means that we're one of the few outlets that has a reach in really every corner of the state, in print and through what we do online. We have our website. We also have our daily newsletter that we send out at 4 a.m. every morning. That's because a friend of mine who ranches cattle in the Flint Hills, who we get our beef from, she complained early on that she wanted to read the news before she went to tend the cattle in the morning. So that's why it goes out at 4 a.m. instead of 8 a.m.
Would you like to put any of that contact information in the chat, especially a donation link? We're all about that. I think that sounds great.
Yeah, I will copy that over now. Here's our subscription link to sign up for our daily newsletter. And this is where you can donate to us.
Wonderful. And the rest of the crowd that's on tonight, loving to see your names and faces. If you have specific questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Anyone who's watching us live on Facebook, I'm going to be keeping an eye on the comment section on the link. So if you've got something to ask, put it out there.
All right.
Yeah, I'd like to do as little talking as I can about myself and just try to leave as much time as possible to answer your questions.
Okay. So let's start, Sherman, with you explained that you were an affiliate of the State's Newsroom. As an affiliate of that group, do they have any say over what the issues are that you all cover in Kansas, or is that strictly your staff's decision?
It is strictly the staff's decision. I have the ultimate say over what we publish. But from State's Newsroom, we get a lot of great support. There are editors available to, copy read or copy proof our stories if we need. I check in with a supervisor once a week to talk about what we're working on, but nobody's ever told me what we should cover or shouldn't cover or how to cover it. They're really just there to provide support. And so, I alone am deciding what we publish from day to day or how we write about it.
So you said that there were 40 affiliates of the State's network. And do you guys ever have the opportunity as affiliates to get together and talk about the different issues that your states are facing?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Once or twice a year, the editors will get together in Washington, D.C., where we have a D.C. bureau through State's Newsroom. And some of the headquarters staff from North Carolina will come up and join us there. And it's really kind of an intense learning experience, going over what others have done that have worked really well, planning ahead for the upcoming election, bringing in, really insightful speakers who can talk about things like how we deal with stress, for instance, in the newsroom, kind of mental health issues, recognizing when our staff is overburdened or when ourselves are overburdened, and how to handle that. Those have been really helpful. We also have, just occasionally, we'll have sometimes regional, sometimes larger, sometimes smaller virtual meetings just like this, where we can talk just among editors about what's going on. And it's really funny that I think it's funny that in this state, a lot of times we hear people complain that, like, we must be some left-wing conspiracy funded by George Soros or whoever. I always say if you have a number for Soros, please put in a good word for us. We would happily take more money to hire more journalists. But I was talking to an editor in another state recently where they have a supermajority control by Democrats in the legislature. And the complaint there is they must be some right-wing conspiracy that is funded by the Koch brothers or, and of course we're funded, the same outfit. We're both affiliates of the same group. But our mission is really to hold powerful people accountable, government officials accountable, and to write about what they're doing. And so, that puts us at odds with the people who hold the most power.
Yes, that would be very true. Now you're the editor. How big of a staff do you actually have at the Reflector?
We have 4.5 people basically. I'm writing news stories and managing the staff. I have an opinion editor, Clay Wirestone, who writes columns and also manages really a battalion of freelancers that he gathers from across the state to really meet this mission of giving a voice to people who have traditionally been denied a voice in public policy debate. And then I have a senior reporter in Tim Carpenter. He's been doing this since about the time I was born in the early 80s when he was a student at K-State. He was at UPI and then the Lawrence Journal World. He and I actually both started at the Capital Journal a couple of months apart in 2004. And I feel like I grew up learning from him and was so thankful that I could convince him to join me in this. Our junior reporter, Rachel Mipro, is just one of easily the most talented young reporter I've ever been around. She is from Louisiana. She grew up in New Orleans, went to LSU, spent a year working for our Louisiana affiliate through a kind of a program where the university places their young students with other outlets. And so she got to do that kind of fellowship for a year. And then I was able to hire her in September last year. And she has just done really amazing work for us and really brings a lot of energy to the staff. We also have another experienced reporter in Allison Kite that we share with our Missouri affiliate. She primarily focuses on environment and she's in the middle of a big project dealing with the aquifer in Kansas, the Ogallala, and has been doing a lot of reporting lately about water issues. Excuse me.
So with only 4.5 staff people, I would imagine you guys are stretched pretty thin during the legislative session.
Yeah, the legislative session is a really rich storytelling opportunity. Excuse me. But it is a lot of work because, every day there might be 20 legislative hearings that are about really interesting topics that impact the daily lives of Kansans. Boy, I really have something in my throat. I'm sorry. And every day we're basically trying to figure out what are the 4 or 5 best things that we can write about today and dividing those up among the staff and just wake up every day and do it again. And that goes on for, 4 months or whatever it is until the end. But I also feel like during the off season, we don't really slow down. The types of stories change. We get to decide what's important instead of following what the legislators are talking about on any given day. But it's really a time to do in-depth reporting. We were remarking, Clay and I were talking about this yesterday, that just since the legislature ended its session in May, we have done 3 big series. A church and state series in May about the influence of religion in the state house. Rachel did a series in September, I think it was, or maybe October, about waiting lists for developmental services, disability services. And then we just did the series this week on Medicaid expansion. Those are projects that take a lot of time and effort to pull off. Major in-depth stories that are 5, 3, and 4 stories in each of these series. And then in the middle of this, we also had the raid in Marion, which we broke that story and have done a lot of reporting on that. That it feels like we've done a lot just in these past 6 months. So the legislative session is just a constant sprint, but it's really busy year round.
So about how many readers do you have, and are they spread out through the state, or are they in specific geographic locations where you have a larger number of readers?
I think we have larger number of readers where there are larger numbers of people in Northeast Kansas and Wichita, but we also have readers all over the state. And I think it's really interesting that we have that kind of reach in, especially in kind of the area where I grew up in, Lyon County, but also down around Coffee County in the Flint Hills. Some of these communities of size where we've done important stories in Salina and Hutchinson, a number of stories in Southwest Kansas. We have a freelancer out there, AJ Dome, who's writing more stories out of Southwest Kansas. I think he'll be covering an event in Hutchinson tomorrow morning, or maybe Garden City, I forget. But we do have readers all over the state, and I think it's interesting during the governor's campaign last year. The Republican candidate staff really didn't like us much, and they might call us and yell at us for 5 minutes about how much they didn't like our story. And then they would give us an exclusive about something that they were going to announce because they knew that we were going to reach an audience that nobody else could actually reach. And I think that's a testament to the readership that we have. We don't release the number of in terms of page views that we have on our website. We have thousands and thousands of people subscribing to our daily newsletter, thousands of people coming to our website every day. What I think is really encouraging is every month since we launched, if you look at the same month a year ago, our year-to-year traffic has increased every month, every year. There is a big joke about how going into August this year, we expected we would actually have a decline for the first time, because how could we ever match the coverage that we had from the abortion amendment last year? And then we had the Marion raid, which just kind of skyrocketed to I think 1 million people read that story in 24 hours and kept going.
Wow.
And so
And it certainly got people's attention. We have a comment in the chat from Susan that
yeah.
your email made me aware of the Marion raid, and I signed up for the paper, and we get the Marion news every week and continue to be flabbergasted. That's great work.
The folks at Marion have really done incredible work at that paper. It's, they really messed with the wrong small paper, where you have somebody who had worked for major newspapers in, I think, Milwaukee, and then taught journalism at a university for 20 years in Illinois, and then came home to run this as like his retirement project. They picked on the wrong paper, and they continue to break these stories. And I forget where they rank now, but it's something like the fourth highest circulation in the state, because everybody subscribed to them after that.
That's a great boon for them. It was definitely an unfortunate situation. So as you think over your career as a journalist, how do you see the coverage of the state government? How has it changed, or has it changed over your career?
Yeah, I like to start just in 2018, because there's been some radical change just since then. But that was when I first became a beat reporter. I started at the Capital Journal as a copy editor, focused on design for a while, did an alternative storytelling project, ended up taking over the online operation in 2011, and really focused on digital audience for a long time. Became the managing editor and led the newsroom for a couple of years. But it wasn't until 2018 that I actually started writing stories on a regular basis and had a front row seat to this. But I think about how much has changed just in these past 5 years. There were a lot more reporters in the State House then. The McClatchy papers, the Star and the Eagle, both had reporters there. Now there's just one reporter for both papers, the two largest papers in the state. The Lawrence Journal World had a reporter then; they no longer do. There are other examples like that. We've helped to fill some of that void. The Kansas News Service has helped fill some of that void as well through public radio, and the Beacon has a reporter over there now. So maybe the numbers are really the same, but it just feels like there are less. There's so many times that I go into a committee hearing and I just think, gosh, there would have been 7 people here 5 years ago, and I'm the only person in the room now. Maybe people are watching online sometimes, but there just doesn't seem to be the same kind of urgency. And we've really seen a trend from other outlets where they sort of decided that the daily grind kind of stories are beneath them sometimes, and they just want to focus on big picture stories. And they do really fantastic work. My former employer, they have great reporters at the Capital Journal. They have great reporters at the Kansas City Star and other outlets throughout the state, but we don't see the kind of attention that we used to have to day-to-day business where you really hold people accountable. And I think, excuse me, I think that's been one of the biggest changes.
Do you think
So
that's intentional on the part of the legislators somehow? Or have people just said, you know what, it's the same old, what's the point?
I think there's just the stress of having fewer reporters and financial stress that cause people to maybe recalculate a little. Um, but certainly, with respect to lawmakers, I think it's easier to get away with things when there are fewer reporters in the room, sometimes no reporters in the room, even if there's a video and people might have a record of this or might be watching this. Like I like to say, we know what they try to get away with when they know we're paying attention. Imagine what they try to get away with when nobody's there. That's just kind of the reality of the situation. I was at this Medicaid expansion announcement today where the governor revealed her plan, and I think Brad Cooper and a TV reporter were the only other journalists there.
wow, that's a that's a big story. So do you see that same lack of coverage at the local government level, or do you guys deal any with local government?
And what I see at the local level is really heartbreaking. We've tried to address the shortage um, from a statewide perspective, and I think we've done that really effectively. And we've been able to provide now state level reporting for local communities that otherwise wouldn't have access to this. But the financial realities of newspapers across the state mean in communities where there would have been 5 or 10 or 15 reporters 20 years ago, there's one or two or three. There's a situation in Hutchinson now where at the last time I checked, it was still this way. The closest reporter that Gannett had was in Oklahoma. They didn't have a journalist in the local newsroom, and they ran a front page story that I think was a little embarrassing about a new community center coming to Hutchinson. The story was obviously written by AI, and they have this model where pages are laid out in Texas, and so the people in Texas didn't realize from the photo of the lake and the scenery that this was in Hutchinson, Minnesota, and that was their 1A centerpiece story.
I missed that one.
Yeah, this was in I think late August, early September, somewhere in there.
Well, I came here from Hutchinson, and they had several reporters and local reporters. They had a school reporter. I just get on the phone and call her and say, "Hey, did you know this is going on in this district?" And that is a huge embarrassment. Now, and we've also consolidated ownership of newspapers across the state, haven't we?
Yeah, Gannett, when I was at the Capital Journal, owned, I think, 19 papers in the state. They now only own 3 papers in the state. But Cherry Road has bought up, I think, 16 of the papers that they formerly had. I think a local family or business interest bought the Pittsburgh paper, so it's locally owned again. But this outfit called Cherry Road came out of a tech company in Seattle that's been around for 40 years. They're saying all the right things about their interest in journalism. I'm not sure what their motivation for buying newspapers really is. I can't imagine that they're profitable or that profitable, but they own a number of these papers now, and Hayes, Garden City, and Newton, and I think Leavenworth, and some other places. So there's certainly been that kind of consolidation. There are still family-owned newspapers, but whether it's owned by a corporation or somebody local, there isn't enough money to have the kind of robust reporting staff that we used to have at every newspaper. Even at the Capital Journal, where when I was managing editor, we had 45 people in the newsroom. I think the staff there maybe 10, I don't know, something like that. I mean, it's really bleak. And that means that fewer people are paying attention to school board meetings and county commissions and city councils and everything, local business, everything else that's happening in the community. We don't have, and excuse me, when we do have people there, they're so overworked and overstressed trying to cover so much that they don't always have time to ask the really hard-hitting questions and find other sources to really fill out those stories. And we don't really have an answer for that as an industry. Like, how do we address what's happened to local reporting in these communities everywhere, especially in Kansas, but everywhere in the country, it's an issue.
Yeah. So, in your opinion, how has the Kansas political game changed, or has it stayed the same over your career?
Well, I think it kind of ebbs and flows a little. I mean, when Brownback was in charge, there was just a lot of open hostility toward reporters. When Collier had his year in office, I think he really made an effort to change the tone of government and dial that back. He had some of the absolute best communications people I've ever worked with. What we've seen since then, of course, is this kind of balance between the governor's administration, which has really tried to be, I think, open and accessible to reporters, and a legislature that has grown increasingly hostile and disingenuous. I mean, they're giving bad faith arguments to support policies. They're saying things that they know are not true. And I should say primarily legislative leadership. Like, one of the mistakes that I think that get made is people think like this, when people complain about what's happening in the legislature, they think, well, all Republicans are like this. Actually, a majority of our readers are Republicans who are unhappy with their party. We're talking about legislative leadership that is setting an agenda and just making bad faith arguments about what they're doing and why they're doing it.
So that leads me to my next question. With the way politics is today in Kansas, do you see that the general public's engagement with their representatives in the legislative process has changed at all?
What I see are, I think, people increasingly inclined to tune out. Like they've become jaded by the political process and want less and less to do with it. And part of this is the goal of legislative leadership. I wrote about this about a year and a half ago, the ways in which the legislature works to keep the public in the dark and to deny public input into the process, and to ignore the will of the public. We're in a situation where, depending on polls, it's anywhere from 2/3 to 80% of the public support legalized marijuana, access to reproductive health rights, the Medicaid expansion, some sort of reform for gun ownership, and a number of other things that the legislature is at odds with. So when you have 80% of the public that says, we want these 4 or 5 things, and the legislature says, we're not interested in any of that, we just want to attack transgender kids in public schools, I think a lot of people say, I'm out. I don't want to pay attention to this anymore.
It does make it hard, when everything that's important to you sits in front of these people and they're just like, no, not going to do that. And you have such a gentle way of saying the things that are going through my mind, which would not be gentle. But a great example of that, when you talk about public education, in the last legislative session, a bunch of people had come to the committee meeting to talk about the K through 12 budget. And they had registered, that they're going to be a speaker, somebody that's going to give testimony. They had sent in their written testimony, the whole 9 yards. And the chairperson got up in front of all of them and said, I know you thought you were here to talk about this bill that we put forward as what it was going to be. But just so you know, this is a gun and go. And we're going to put out something that has nothing to do what you were here to talk about. So you might as well not. Now, first off, what the heck is a gun and go? And why is that legal?
Right. Well, I can answer the first part. We see this routinely where somebody has a bill and you introduce an amendment. Typically an amendment, as we would think of it, is like, we want to change this part of the bill or rewrite this sentence or add something to it. When you have what's referred to as a gun and go, the amendment is, we're going to delete everything in this bill and put another bill inside it. I think it has other names in other states, but here it's known as the gun and go. This happens sometimes at the committee level. This happens rampantly at the end of the session. Almost everything that gets passed each year gets passed in the final 48 hours as a product of late night negotiations where they shove a bunch of random things, sometimes bills that even have not had a hearing. I think in the most egregious case, we had 29 tax bills shoved into a single piece of legislation at the last second. Oftentimes it's a bill that the underlying bill had absolutely nothing to do with the bill that it became. And sometimes they confuse themselves. I've been in meetings where senators were going, okay, we can't track which number, this was this number, then it's over here, now it's in that bill. I can't figure out where my legislation went and keep track of it themselves, but this is how they do business. And I think a lot of it just has to do with leadership wanting to hold people under the gun in the final hours, so there's maximum pressure to convince them to do what they really want and to work out these deals at the end. It feels a lot of times like the first 3 months of the session are just all theater, and what really matters is the final 2 or 3 days they're going to put together what they were going to do all along. That's what we see a lot of times through this, and the gut and go makes that possible.
And I think Anita made a comment in the chat that I would wholeheartedly agree with. We have these issues where people want this and this and this and this, and we don't get any of them as citizens of Kansas because the legislature holds it up, and then we turn right around and vote those same people back into office. It's what is that saying? You get the same thing when you do the same thing, or something like that.
The definition of insanity: doing the
Yes.
same thing again and again and expecting a different response.
That's
I just think that we would have different results if you could like clockwork orange some of the constituents and make them watch what their legislator is doing in the state house. But it goes back to what we were saying earlier. People have checked out, and a lot of people don't pay attention until right before the election. And you're easily swayed by what shows up in your mailbox, what you see on TV, what you hear in these last minute campaign stops. And I don't think people don't know what their legislator was saying in mid-February on the Senate floor or in the House floor. And I think that's part of the issue. But I think a lot about when we had this redistricting fight a couple of sessions ago where they just very deliberately gerrymandered not just congressional districts, but House and Senate districts. And there was an activist from Wyandotte County who was part of this news conference who said, you've awakened a sleeping giant, and we're going to come back and we're going to come out in full force. You thought you were going to suppress the vote, but we're going to make sure more people show up to vote than ever before. And then 10% fewer people showed up to vote than had 4 years earlier. But in between there, you had a situation where Wyandotte County for many years had been trying to put together what they referred to as a safe and welcoming ordinance to try to figure out how we can kind of live in peace with immigrants that we need to perform jobs and not alienate them or subject them to a potentially hostile federal action. and they passed this ordinance. The legislature, with a attorney general who was running for governor, came rushing in and said, we have to make these kind of ordinances illegal everywhere. And they shipped it out. So the people who showed up to testify were not allowed to actually speak in opposition to the bill. It was a one-sided. And as soon as the legislature passed it, the governor signed it the second she could so that he could not hold it against her in the election. And so when I talked to this activist this year to say, why did so many fewer people show up? She said, well, this was part of it, that they looked at this and thought, why are we even trying? I think when you see, again, the legislature, the government doing something that is at direct odds of what the people want them to do, it causes them to check out of the process. And that makes it easier for people to continue to stay in place in the legislature. We also saw in last year's election cycle, where just the House was up, half of the races in November were uncontested.
Yeah, that's not going to get us where we need to be. But I understand why people that are qualified to serve as legislators make the decision that that's not what they want to do with their life. In addition to the gut and goes, the legislature also has caucus meetings. Can you kind of explain to us what the caucus meetings are and how often they're holding them, and are they making decisions, and what kind of decisions? That's a lot of questions.
This is good. It's something that plays into our coverage sometimes. We don't spend a lot of time talking about it because it feels like the golden rule is you don't write about process in the stories because it turns people off. But I'm happy to talk about the process to an engaged group of folks like all of you. Before the House or the Senate goes into a session where they're going to debate and vote on bills, the Republicans go in one room and the Democrats go in another, and they all talk among themselves about what they're about to vote on and why they're going to vote a certain way or what the issues are. Sometimes they'll talk about they have people whose jobs are like to be friends with somebody from the other teams. They can come back and say, well, I think they're going to have this amendment and here's why we should shoot it down. Excuse me.
Awesome.
So you go into these, they're all open, although the Senate Republicans have twice kicked reporters out that I'm aware of since the current Senate president took over. But these are meetings where they're just saying, we're going to debate Senate Bill 43. It's about this. And Senator from Tragic Haircut here is going to stand up and talk about what this bill really does. And, they go on at length about the intricacies of it. The rest of the caucus can ask questions like, are we concerned about this? Is this the best way to do it? Who is for this bill or against this bill? It's just kind of like a primer for them. Do something nefarious or do something trivial or positive. So sometimes it's like, this is just a technical bill that'll clean up some language, and they may or may not be telling the truth, which you'll find out later, but most of the time they are, because they're talking to their own. But we like to go to those because sometimes they'll really say out loud why they're really doing something when they're talking among themselves that they won't say on the floor. And so it's helpful to get a better understanding of what is really going on there. We don't make it to all of these. Sometimes if it's a really important issue, we'll be directing various staff like, Tim, you go here, I'll go there, Rachel's going to be down there. We'll all come back and compare notes at the rail. You hear people talk about the rail. That's just the railing at the center of the rotunda on the third floor. So we'll come back and say, okay, here's what's going on with these three bills. Yeah, well, they're going to vote against it for this reason. Well, they're going to try to run this gut and go and, whatever's going down. So that's what the caucus meetings are all about.
Okay, kind of sounds like the House of Cards.
I never watched that series.
Oh, you got to watch it. It's amazing.
I watched a couple of episodes and was dismayed by the unrealistic portrayal of how journalists behave and didn't watch anymore.
Well, I'm beginning to believe that the portrayal of the representatives That's accurate. I'm beginning to believe that. So what do you see as the three big topics moving into the 2024 session that we're about a month out from?
The two biggest topics are easy. It's school vouchers and taxes. Private school vouchers, that it's really just trying to funnel public money into students who are already enrolled in private schools. The Senate president acknowledged last year that if you can't afford to send your kid to a private school now, the voucher isn't going to help you. And we know from the fiscal note that was attached to this, the fiscal note is where the budget office looks at the implication, how much is this bill going to cost, or where's the money going, kind of thing. And almost all of the money associated with this, I want to say it was like 150 million. Most of that money was going to go to students who are already enrolled in private school. And that's what it is. It's just a big giveaway to the rich kids, right? Half the counties don't have a private school, and they describe this, of course, as school choice, even though it's really not clear who actually gets a choice from this. But this has long been one of the main sticking points or one of the big things that they've tried to push. The governor vetoed this bill last year, I believe. Some of the proposals, though, died in negotiations, really didn't have much support among the rank and file. The other issue, of course, is taxes. The dream for leadership and for the Kansas Chamber and Americans for Prosperity are to adopt a flat tax, which would basically slash the highest income tax rate. So the wealthiest Kansans would get an extraordinary tax cut. Everyday Kansans would get a trivial tax cut. Last year's plan also included tax cuts for shareholders of multinational corporations, out-of-state shareholders. Variations of that could come forward. There's growing resentment, I think, among the rank and file that they have not been able to pass any kind of tax reform of substance in 2 years, even though we're now looking at almost a $3 billion surplus, because of this insistence from leadership that they bundle really toxic ideas with all the other ideas. If you were to divide each of these tax plans out and give them each an independent vote, a lot of them would pass. Ideas for property tax reform, there are attempts to fast track the tax cut for food, on sales tax cut for food, and some other sales tax exemptions have been proposed for feminine hygiene products or other items. There are a lot of tax cuts that would receive widespread support among Democrats and Republicans, but when you package them with some of these more toxic proposals, they end up going down. The governor has vetoed them, and then they don't have the 2/3 majority support to override the veto. They'll come back and try this again, and both of these things could end up as part of a negotiation for Medicaid expansion. Democrats have to decide how much are they willing to give up in exchange for Medicaid expansion. Will they give a big tax cut to the rich? Will they give a big gift to private school kids? What are they willing to give up in exchange for Medicaid expansion? I think that's going to be the big question for the session. The governor has held steady in saying, I'm not giving anything up. 80% of Kansans want this. A majority of Republicans and Democrats want this. They need to go force their leaders to make this happen. And if they don't, we'll come after them in November. That's her plan. It's a lot of bluster for right now. When it comes down to it in late March, if you're looking at a $300 million tax cut for rich people, maybe that's worth it. We'll see what the deal ends up being.
So I got some questions from the chat. I'm going to interject here. One of them is kind of more of a statement, but it's a question about whether there is a piece of legislation that has been brought up talking about people with terminal illnesses and having end-of-life options. Are you aware of such a bill?
I'm not. It's a really interesting idea, but I can't remember a time where this was talked about in the past 5 years.
So it's possible that's in a nearby state or something that has come up nationally, but I know that that is true in a handful of other states, that that's
It
something that
is.
exists.
One of the hurdles here, of course, is that anything that is related to healthcare, they're afraid to bring it to a vote because it could be amended with Medicaid expansion.
Yep, God forbid. Second comment, when we were just talking about how the same people keep getting elected again and again and again, and part of that is because they're running unopposed. Part of that is because they've successfully othered some minority group for people to decide to hate on, like trans kids. And that's why our nation is ripe for a dictatorship, an authoritarian government to take over. So that was another comment in the chat. The next question is that from the coverage of the legislature, it appears that a significant amount of this sort of extremist right-wing legislation is coming from out-of-state national organizations. The Heritage Foundation comes to mind. And so the school vouchers, the LGBTQ issues, et cetera, are you aware that that may be influencing and potentially handing legislators prefab bills and saying, here, run this up the flagpole? And if that is the case, most Kansans probably don't realize that's where it's coming from.
You know, I was at a forum in the spring where our reporter Rachel Mipro was actually moderating with some school officials, and somebody asked the question of, like, you know, how many bills are written by an out-of-state group, or made the point that a particular bill they were talking about was written by an out-of-state group, and there was just like this audible gasp from the audience, and it caught me by surprise, because I think when you are over there so long, so often, you become jaded to some of these things, like the gut and go. You don't realize that for most Kansans, it would be shocking to know that almost every single bill that is voted on is written by an out-of-state group in the legislature right now. I mentioned the Heritage Group, there's ALEC, of course. Opportunity Solutions Project has gotten a lot more pull lately. There's this group in Texas that paid their way into a hearing on a bill that would criminalize homelessness last year. You know, for the right price, you can get anything in front of a committee in the legislature. For the right price, you can get a vote on anything in the legislature.
So whose palm do we need to grease to get CanCare expansion in front of the legislature?
Right. You know, for the right price, you could make that happen. One of the things we've learned is that actually legislators are pretty easily bought. We learned that with the so-called TEFI legislation a couple of years ago, which is to create a pawn shop for the rich, ostensibly. There's, if you Google this, you'll find stories I've written about it, and other people have written about it. The whole thing sounds like a farce. We see legislation, again, from the Opportunity Solutions Project to make it harder to get access to food if you're really poor. Kind of some draconian provisions to add red tape to that. They've also introduced some bizarre election conspiracies to try to make it more difficult to vote. You know, all of these things are coming from outside groups that have something to gain by doing this. The other one that showed how easily the legislature is bought, and the New York Times has an in-depth story about this, which I aggregated and we've done some reporting on as well, was the gambling legislation, where we gave an extraordinarily low tax rate to these gambling companies for sports betting, and they're allowed to write off all their promotional bets. So you'll see sometimes they'll say, you know, you're sign up to bet in our app and we'll give you $500 free that you can use to bet on, or whatever. Well, that $500 gets deducted from what they owe to the state in taxes. Overall, I forget the numbers, but it's just sort of like this extraordinary millions and millions of dollars that have been spent betting in Kansas, and we've collected pennies on the dollar in taxes.
I read that it was like $1,100 that we've collected in taxes from those gambling, and I actually think it was billions of dollars that have been bet.
It it may be. I forgot the numbers, but
Yeah.
we've reported on this if you search at kansasreflector.com. What the New York Times report showed was these lobbyists who just swayed legislators with an expensive bottle of whiskey and fine cigars and these just kind of lavish parties, and they just totally went along with it.
What do they think they are? Supreme Court justices? Come on.
Well, that leads me to my next question. We currently have a number of legislators who are older, they're retired, or they're self-employed, or they are wealthy enough that they don't need to work. And currently, the pay to serve as a legislator is frankly pretty minimal. But in 2025, there's going to be an increase in the legislators' pay, somewhere in the $40,000 range. Do you believe that will make a change in the makeup of our legislature?
I do think it could have a significant impact. Right now, we see young legislators who are saying, "I can't afford to be here anymore," and it creates this issue. Overwhelmingly, it is retirees and people who are independently wealthy who dominate the legislature. I think that if you're not paying a living wage, it's hard to convince somebody to give up their day job and come to Topeka and do this. And I think one of the trade-offs, which has not really been ironed out here, but one of the things you'd like to see is to say, okay, we're going to pay you to do this as a full-time job. We want you to be here year-round. Like, legislative session can still end in May, but you need to do some important work during the off season with these interim hearings to really understand what's happening in Kansas. And I think that would make the legislature better as well. If you have a smarter, more informed, more engaged legislature, then coming in January, ready to go and ready to do business, I think that that could have a real impact. But certainly, it'll be easier to recruit people this year, knowing by the time you get into office, you'll actually be making enough money that you can live off this. And right now, when you go out and recruit, it's been you want to subject myself to intense criticism from whichever party you're running against. They're going to demonize you, and you have to withstand that within your own little community. You have to put up the money to do this, and you're not going to make enough to live on. It's a really, really difficult ask to recruit people right now. So the hope is that this can make a difference. It's one of those things that was really pushed by some of the younger legislators. There's a group called the Millennial Action Project, supported by a DC group that's trying to kind of change the tone of politics and get people working across the aisle again. And they've been focused on issues that really help young people. And it's some of the Republicans in the legislature, the young Republicans who have led this effort. And I covered kind of meetings outside of the state house where they had gotten together, and they talked not just about legislative pay, but to say, like, we really screwed up capers here. Why would anybody want the tier 3? I want that tier 1 or tier 2 plan. We need to revert this. And whether they actually ever do that is another thing, but there's a realization that if you want young people in the legislature, you have to make these kind of concessions.
Absolutely. Moving into our new session, what is it that you are most hopeful for out of the legislature?
I am hopeful that they end the session early because it is an election year. That's, I don't know. It's hard to say what I'm hopeful for. We approach this trying to figure out what's going on so that we can give people the information they need to know to decide whether this is a good bill or something they don't like or who they want to vote for. It's not our job to tell people, whether something should pass or who they should keep in office or vote out of office. Our job is just to give them the information about what's happening. I feel like I get lied to 10 times a day in the State House during the session. I don't think that's going to change. So, we just approach it. I think in the words of a certain Washington Post editor, that we're not at war, but we're at work. And that's how we'll enter the session.
Well, I just want you to know that I very much appreciate the work that you all do. We don't take a newspaper. Well, we take the county newspaper, but we don't take a newspaper at our house. So I think we both get your newspaper, and that's where I become informed. And so I very much appreciate it. Do any of the rest of you have any more questions?
We could randomly call on people if you're shy.
Jane, do you have a question?
I do, Sherman. How do you get younger people to vote?
I think you have to talk to them like they're adults. Right now we have lawmakers, and I hear this from young people all the time, that lawmakers are not talking to young people. They look down on them. They talk down to them if they do acknowledge them. They're not talking to them like they deserve a seat at the table. I've talked to researchers at Tufts University who have studied this. Young people, and I see this too, just anecdotally, when I talk to high schoolers and college kids, they are so much more engaged than previous generations, certainly more engaged than I was at that age. But they are really jaded with what's happening and not really interested in being part of this corrupt game. But they care as much as anybody about some of these issues. The top issues for young people are the economy and reproductive health rights, and some of the same things that are the top issues for other people, for older people, for adults. I think that lawmakers have to, candidates have to acknowledge this and welcome them into the debate and actually try to appeal to them. I think that is a big part of it. I also just think somewhere I just want to see one candidate. It doesn't matter where it is in Kansas, even if it's in the most rural area. I want to see one candidate just unabashedly run on a campaign for legalized marijuana, Medicaid expansion, abortion rights, and gun control. I even if you leave the gun control part out, if you just go on those three big issues, almost all Kansans want Medicaid expansion, marijuana, and abortion rights. Just run on that alone and see what happens. I think that's one way you could get young people involved.
That's good advice.
How do you reach young people with those messages? Ads in the Kansas Reflector? How do you do that?
We haven't really made an effort to say we want to put our stories in front of young people and this is how we're going to do it. But when we look at the breakdown of where our traffic is coming from, according to Google, we have roughly the same percentage in each of the age brackets that Google tracks. So the youngest bracket is 18 to 34, then you have 35 to 44, and so on. Then you have 65 and older. So it's, I think, 5 different age brackets, and it's roughly 20% in each of those 5 brackets. So I think part of it is really if you're giving a message that resonates with young people, I think they'll pay attention to you. I don't think you have to necessarily go out of your way. I don't think you have to, picket the college campus, although that may not be a bad idea. I just think it's really about, what you're saying and how you're saying it.
Judy makes a point that something that's desperately important to our next 2 generations is the planet, the climate.
Yeah, that's something else for young people.
That's something that people my age and older are, first off, we caused all that. And secondly, nobody wants to own up to it. And Anita brought up that Loud Light is doing a great job of getting out the youth vote.
Yeah, climate change is another one of those issues. But some of these things, I don't think older generations realize just how passionate young people are. Young people are furious that we've destroyed the planet for them. Even I'm at this stage where I'm just like, by the time we run out of water, I'll be dead anyway. But young people are going, I have the rest of my life ahead of me. What are you doing? And why don't you care more? We also have a generation now of young adults who were trained from a young age in school to cover themselves in the blood of their peers during a shooting so that the shooter thinks they're already dead. You know, they have a very different perspective on gun control than people my age or your age.
I'm afraid
Immigrants.
we may run out of water before your lifetime is over. I drove over we live at Lake Perry. I drove over the bridge today. I've never seen it so low.
Really?
It's bad.
I was talking to our environmental reporter the other day, Allison, about a tip I had about Valley Falls being out of water and having to bring in drinking water. She said, but they're so close to Lake Perry. What's the deal? You know, people don't realize that the crisis is now. She wrote about another town recently down along the Oklahoma border that has no water. Caney and Russell and Hayes are all dealing with water crisis. And it's not just in Northeast Kansas, we like to think of this as a Western Kansas agriculture problem, but people in Northeast Kansas don't realize how perilous the situation is for our drinking water supply.
Very much so. Anybody else have any questions?
If no, I do.
Okay.
Just one more. Reaching immigrants and Hispanics who can vote. How do you recommend?
The ACLU has a report about some of these issues that they released over the summer about kind of how local officials have a lot of control over policies that have a tremendous impact on voter turnout. And some of these issues are making things accessible to people in other languages, really providing educational materials, people at the polls who are bilingual.
And the ballot itself.
And the ballot itself. I mean, those are a big part of it. One of the issues is we have, you know, a situation like in Dodge City in 2018, where I think it's 2018, years get blurry, but you know, the county clerk there decided to move the only polling place in the city outside of the city, which had a dramatic impact on a population where you have a majority minority population in Dodge City, and every single elected person in the city and the county at that time was white, even though about 70% of the population was Hispanic or non-white. You know, that's a major issue.
Julie, not Julie Wilson, Julie H. asks, do you have a sense that more people in Kansas are becoming more engaged and mobilized? And sorry, I skipped down to the next one. And can perhaps make a difference in the coming elections?
I think my mood on this varies from day to day or week to week, but I keep thinking about what we saw in the August 2022 primary with the abortion amendment vote. You know, if there was ever a demonstration that democracy is still alive and well and working, it was the result of that election. This was an amendment that was directly calculated from the timing of it to the description on the ballots. Everything about it was calculated to favor the people who wanted this to pass. And 69% said, or 59% said no, whatever the number, 59 to 41. So 59% said no, despite having every advantage in favor of it passing. You know, this is an election where if you're not affiliated with Republicans or Democrats, you don't get to vote, except you could because of this. So, you know, the expectation was that you would have a 2-to-1 Republican advantage. And still, we saw the greatest number of young people who ever turned out to vote. We saw an unprecedented turnout in general, and we saw a result that nobody really saw coming. I've said this before, and there's always the one person who's like really defiant, like, I told people this was going to happen. You know, in the public sphere at that time, there wasn't anybody shouting from the rooftops that there's going to be a dramatic rejection of this. Even the people who led the campaign to defeat this thought it's going to come down to the wire and we're probably going to lose. You know, the result was totally unexpected for almost everybody. So when I think about that, I think, yeah, there's still hope, right? If you have there's a chance that people can be engaged, they can turn out, they can make a difference. We see several groups that have popped up now to try to support moderate Republicans in the primary elections, including one founded by the governor. We'll see if that makes a difference. We see these repeated attacks on public schools, which are really what forced Brownback's policies to be overturned. You know, the attacks on public schools, what was happening with those budgets, caused an uprising in 2016, the same year that Kansas overwhelmingly put Donald Trump in the White House. They also overwhelmingly threw the conservatives out of the legislature at the same time on the same day. And then that group of legislators overturned the tax experiment, actually passed Medicaid expansion, but it was vetoed. And they put the state on a path to satisfy the court with enough funding for public schools. And then they all said, our work's done, we're out of here. And then others went after them in the primaries, of course. There's a senator I talked to from Salina, I think it was, who was elected in 2016 on the promise to overturn the Brownback experiment. In 2020, he was attacked by the chamber for imposing the largest tax increase in state history, which is another way of saying he overturned the Brownback tax experiment. But because he was branded as having imposed the largest tax increase, they voted him out in the primary. Going after, trying to support moderates in the primary, I think is part of the issue, so that everybody has to come to the table and work together. We'll just have to see what happens, but I think there's reason to be hopeful.
That would be good. We need something positive to happen here in Kansas, or I'm afraid we are going to lose all of our younger generation to other states that are a bit more progressive than we are, or a lot more progressive than we are. If any of you are interested in how your legislator voted in the 2023 session, on our website, we have, I believe, help me, Betsy, 6 counties where you can go in and you can look at who your legislators are, what committees they served on, what bills they introduced. And then in another document, you can see on the issues that the 802 is concerned about, or you can see how they voted on those bills that came forward for an actual vote in the session. And it is Johnson County, Shawnee County, Finney County. Oh, Betsy, help me.
I'm pulling it up as we
Pottawatomie County.
Yeah, Johnson, Shawnee, Reno, Douglas, Finney, Pottawatomie.
And I am close to having the Sedgwick County one done too. So that will go up shortly. And then if any of you are interested in having your county posted, you could email us at info@802united.org and say, hey, I'd be interested in seeing how my legislators voted in Johnson County. And Stuart, what county are you from, Allison? I know it because I'm a Western Kansas person. Stanton County, yes.
Yeah.
I lived in Garden City for a long time. You'd think I'd know that. So we would be glad to work through that and put it up. I've got a long car ride over Christmas that I can get a lot done while he drives. So Sherman, thank you very much. I always enjoy listening to you talk. I know that you're going to be early next month at the Shawnee County League of Women Voters, your group. Where else are you going to be in the near future?
Yeah, I'll be at the Topeka Library in early January with the League of Women Voters, and then in Manhattan in early February. I've reached out tentatively or talked tentatively with some others who've reached out about some others. They're not set in stone, but there's another Leavenworth County group that is interested in a virtual event, and we'll see how that goes. Actually planning to meet with.
This is Linda Johnson, and I talked to you about that. And we are firm on this end. It will be on Zoom on January 17th at 10 a.m. That's a Saturday morning. That's our League of Women Voters meeting time. But we're going to all be on Zoom, perhaps some in small groups, but mostly just out of our homes. We think the weather is so bad in January that Zoom made sense to just not deal with the weather issues.
and that makes it easier for me and my staff too.
Yes. Yes.
If you can follow up with me by email,
will.
I'd appreciate it to make sure we
I
get
will.
all the details correct.
Good.
And then you guys can also talk about the well-run dry story while you're there.
Yeah, I'd be interested in learning more about that. I think Allison may be interested in talking to you about that.
Okay, well, if we don't have anything else for tonight, we will, I believe, on the third Thursday of January, be hosting our next town hall. We've not firmed up the plans for that yet, but we will get that posted on our 802 Facebook, and you all are welcome to join us again next month. Thank you. Have a good evening, and have a great holiday.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
I'm answering Mike's question in the chat before we sign off.
Okay, well, you tell me when you're ready to sign off then.
So Mike was asking about if we're planning any 2024 protest actions against Speaker of the House Hawkins, who's up for re-election on November 5th. And Mike, what I'd ask you to do is hit the website and send us an email. That comes directly to my email. And if someone wants to organize that, we're definitely here to spread the word.
Okay, I think it'd be great to do something in the Harvest Park right across the street from his house. Let him know that everybody would really be happy that, get him out of there.
I love it. All right, well, email me and we'll start setting something up.
Okay, great. All right. Look forward to that.
All right. Have a good evening, guys. Thank
Thank
you.
you everyone for coming. This was a delight.